Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel on the future of compliance and policy management. It's great to have you guys with us. I can't see you, but we know that you're there, and we have you in our minds and in our hearts. We're very excited that you could join us today for this panel. I'm Shai. I am the program manager at Numa New York, a global startup accelerator for B2B international startups that are expanding to the US market. And one of our companies in this current cohort is ClausMatch, a RegTech company that you guys are all here to see today, along with our panelists. And so we have a very exciting conversation with the CEO and co-founder of ClausMatch and other experts in the compliance management space. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our moderator today, Rachel Woolley, the Director of Financial Crime at Fenergo. Fenergo is based out of, is in the HQ in Dublin and is the leading provider of client lifecycle management, AML, KYC compliance, and client data management solutions for investments, corporate, commercial, and private banks. Rachel has over 12 years of experience in the financial services industry and has held a number of risk and compliance roles focused primarily on anti-money laundering compliance. Rachel's current remit covers all aspects of financial crime, including ongoing monitoring and analysis of evolving legislations, trends, and microeconomic factors and macroeconomic factors as well impacting financial regulation. Rachel, it's wonderful to have you with us.
Hi, Shai. Thank you so much.
I'll pass it over to you to introduce our panelists.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. So we have a really great lineup of panelists today, and I'll start with some quick introductions to the three panelists that are joining us. So first up, we have Doreen Gusar, who is a Senior Director of Regulatory Compliance at Roostify, which is a web and mobile service that simplifies and accelerates the home buying experience. She's a passionate and seasoned compliance professional with an established history in the industry, being involved from inception to completion of lending and mortgage processes within the technology and regulatory space. Doreen is a thought leader in machine learning and artificial intelligence processes as they relate to the financial services and lending industry. We're also joined today by Michael Volkov, who is a recognized expert in anti-corruption enforcement and defense, internal investigations, ethics and compliance, and white-collar defense issues. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Volkov Law Group, LLC, with over 30 years experience in practicing law. And we're also joined by Jay Likodit, who is founder and CEO of ClausMatch, which helps financial institutions and regulatory organizations to implement robust governance and compliance documentation processes as part of the first and second line of defense. Having worked in the legal and compliance profession for several years in Morgan Stanley, Jay sought to improve the current ways of how legal and compliance departments manage internal compliance documentation. He then went on to found ClausMatch in 2012. So welcome to all of our panelists for today's discussion. We have a number of questions that we're going to be asking throughout the hour today. And then there's also an open Q&A for our audience members today as well, which, if I'm not mistaken, you can add those questions into the chat box in the meeting controls. So without further ado, we'll kick off with some of the questions that we have for today's panelists. And first, we're going to start with the conversation that the US and UK regulators are having with regards to compliance, and essentially looking at the process of embedding compliance or incorporating compliance as part of the DNA of a firm. So we'll start with Doreen in terms of your thoughts on what that means.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Doreen Gusar here. Happy to be part of this panel. So what does that mean when US regulators are talking about making compliance as part of the firm's DNA? Well, financial institutions, they operate in a very dynamic, influenced by industry consolidation, convergence of financial services, emerging technology, and market globalization. So, for an organization to be profitable, but also compliant in such environment, financial institutions needs to continuously assess and modify their product and services that they're offering. Overall, operations in the context of business strategy, where they're building a great culture of compliance and a code of conduct. What that means is awareness of any regulatory changes to proactively enact and address developments as they take place, in this marketplace. And when all of these forces are combined, it also creates a inherent risk. And I do have a point why I'm talking about risk so much. So to address these risks, the financial institution must develop and maintain a sound compliance management system that is integrated into their overall risk management approach within their firm. So ultimately, compliance should be weaved in daily routine of management and employee focuses for the firm.
Great, thanks, Doreen. And Jay, could I ask you to add your thoughts on how we can embed compliance as part of the DNA of a firm?
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about it over the last 10 years and looking at how regulators are enforcing regulations and new regulations coming out and enforcement notices from those, I think we can all agree that a lot of banks have failed at compliance in many aspects and respects. And I think that was the reason why, I wanted to do something about it from the technology perspective, because from what we've seen is that compliance today has been a very static program in every institution. It's mostly enforced through technical controls or operational controls, which are then tested in periods of time. And what we're seeing from regulators is that compliance needs to be more dynamic. Compliance needs to be part of the culture and DNA of the organization. And that really comes from the top, from the point of view, of the message that needs to go across the organization. But then also, I think from technically, the approach needs to change. Rather than trying to control what people can and cannot do, start implementing more kind of technology with cultural enforcement. And I've been talking with a number of interesting thinkers in the field in terms of how can we actually change the culture, and it really is changing the behavior of people by let's say nudging or asking them questions around compliance on regular basis, and not just having a yearly yearly trainings which people go through and then forget immediately next day.
Absolutely, and tone from the top is really key to that. And so, Michael, with your experience then, so I'm sure you have some thoughts in terms of how to embed compliance in the firm's DNA, and what that actually means, I guess, from a financial institution's perspective.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and thank you, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. I think we're at this has been sort of the culmination of a movement over 20 years. And over the last 20 years, we've seen aggressive enforcement coupled with sort of demands for better compliance programs and a commitment to ethics. And I think Jay said it right when he was talking about culture and ethical culture. And Doreen said it right when she was talking about controls and making sure that that risk management is part of this process. All the concepts that we're mentioning here have sort of culminated in this mix of ethics and technology. And now, I mean, I don't use this term lightly, but I like to use it just for dramatic purposes. But it's the revolution that's going on. This is by far and away the biggest revolution in corporate governance that's ever occurred. And I say that because stakeholders are demanding it. I call it the currency of business now, is you better have a robust ethics and compliance program that's not just paper, that's not just a set of rules, but that it's demonstrated in the activity of every individual every day. And so that's where we are right now. And I think in the US, from my US perspective, sorry to be narrow perspective here, but the Biden administration is getting ready to raise the demands in this area even further.
Absolutely, and we have a couple of things that we'll touch on that regard a little bit later. So really, I suppose what we're looking at is almost this question about doing the right things versus doing things right. So really embedding compliance from an inherent approach, so that it's not, as Jay mentioned, almost like a tick the box on an annual basis. Have we been compliant? It just becomes part of the thought process. So from a practicalities perspective, where do we start in terms of designing that approach? Doreen, perhaps we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I'm a compliance officer, so I'll tell you that we need to start looking at our compliance management system and how, you know, a firm or institution learns about its compliance responsibilities. You know, ensure that employees understand what these responsibilities are, and then also requirements that incorporate into the business processes. Review your operations to ensure responsibilities that are carried out, requirements are met, and take corrective action plans and update materials as necessary. So what does that mean? For an effective compliance management, commonly comprises of, you know, three independent elements. So look at board and oversight management program. Look at your compliance program. What does that look like? Look at your compliance audit. What does your audit look like? Was there a risk? Was there a concern? You know, did you pass with flying colors? When all of these elements are strong and working together, an institution will be a successful managing its compliance responsibilities and risks now and in the future. So institutions are required to comply with federal, state, and other consumer protection laws, where non-compliance can result in monetary penalties, litigation, formal enforcement actions, as well as a reputational risk. So the responsibility lies with these three major independencies, where institutions' compliance appropriately rests with the board of directors management of the institution. Therefore, regulators expect these institutions to have an effective CMS adapted into the unique business strategy. So I would say look at your compliance management system, and that would be a good start point to look at.
Great, that's some really good practical guidance in terms of the first steps, I guess. And Jay, from your perspective then, what are your thoughts in terms of actually starting into the practical implementation of the DNA and the compliance function?
Yeah, I think following on from Doreen as well, it's you know, the first, once you've evaluated the compliance management system, I obviously come from the world of technology, and looking at technology, compliance technology, and also looking at the problems that our clients bring to us, we can see that a lot of compliance departments are not empowered to start looking at technology and start using technology. And the other part of that is that whenever an institution is bringing technology in, they often go for, you know, large incumbent GRC solutions, but actually looking at what you can achieve with that is often, you know, often leads to a very difficult implementation. And I'll just give an example. You know, if you take a global bank and look at the obligations that they have, and then the policies and procedures that they need to manage, and the controls, there are tens of thousands of them on each side. And then what regulators want, they want you to map all of that. So you have a dynamic compliance map. So if an obligation changes, you know which policy and procedures and controls are impacted. But it's extremely difficult to map all of that with just, you know, manually with just people. And there are a lot of failures in that purely from the point of view that you know, people cannot map that. So looking at technologies that can use machine learning, that can use AI to take that data, to understand that data and map it across the organization. So that compliance map becomes dynamic rather than a static view, which is done and updated once a year.
Absolutely, and it manages it on an ongoing basis rather than at a periodic point in time. And Michael, from your perspective then, any practical considerations?
Definitely. I think first is oftentimes I've seen corporate boards that just do not know how to conduct oversight and monitoring of a compliance program. So I usually try to make sure we conduct quote unquote training, which is to explain to them what their oversight and monitoring obligations are. The risk of litigation around board performance right now has increased significantly in the United States. Number two, Jay hit it right on the head here when he said you have to have empowered compliance personnel. And empowered means under the Justice Department guidance with regard to compliance programs right now, you have to be independent, you have to have autonomy, you have to have authority, and you have to have resources. And those are the critical things that the board has to do and make sure that senior management is doing to provide to the compliance officer. Then I thought Doreen, I thought her point about the management systems is absolutely critical. And I'm sure as a compliance officer, she suffers through this. And I want to say suffer in a good way, Doreen, because the thing I've told people and worked with people is more and more compliance people are moving to technology solutions. Thank God, thank goodness. I mean, I just cannot tell you that I tell people and advise them, put in a third-party risk management program, put in a policy management program. I promise you'll be a happier person. And I guarantee happiness as a lawyer. That's impossible, but I do, because technology is here to leverage resources. It leverages Doreen's ability to manage her risks, and it gives her a peace of mind in doing that. So I wrote years ago about the revolution that was coming in technology, in compliance, because I'm tired of begging the board for one or two more bodies. Give me a technology solution, and that's going to leverage our resources. So that's I'm sorry to go on, but I want to make one final point. The way to educate the board is not to go to the board or to senior management and say, we're going to all go to jail unless we do this. Okay. Nobody likes fear. My point is, and it's board worthy, is to provide them the clear research that says ethical companies perform better in the long run, sustainable growth and sustainable profits. So we're not saying let's do this as a cost center to keep us out of trouble. We're going to do this to have a culture of this so that we perform better and make more money in the long run.
And I think that's a really good point, that it shouldn't be the case that you're instilling fear, but rather empowering and encouraging increased adoption of technology, and ultimately embedding that compliance culture within the entire organization and the people.
Right.
So in terms of then, I suppose, the people side and that encouraging that adoption, or embracing, I suppose, that the adoption of technology, I think everybody on the panel has mentioned in some respects, either systems or the use of technology to do that. Are there added benefits, I suppose, to encouraging increased adoption of technology solutions? Jay, maybe we'll start with you. This is probably your primary wheelhouse, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think outside of increased efficiency and a better way to provide the audit trail and the view of compliance program within the organization, I think we've just recently had a great example of compliance making people happier within the organization, rather than seeing compliance as as a cost center, as a department which usually tries to prevent business, not really tries to prevent business done, but the business often looks at compliance that way. And that is very, very simple. Rolling out a modern policy management solution, and the head of one of the fixed income departments comes back and says, "Hey, this is amazing. I've just done a search and it took me to the exact paragraph of what I needed to find in our compliance documents." And that makes people happier when they can access information much quicker. But equally, when a regulator asks a question and you can exactly pinpoint the answer to that question, I think also makes it much easier to pass those audits and regulatory audits. And I think people underestimate how much happier they are when they have to do less admin work. And compliance is a lot about admin work.
Yeah, and I guess it makes those roles and those tasks more rewarding when they're if more effectively achieved rather than it being a cumbersome process. Doreen, from your perspective, anything in terms of the advantages, I guess, of embracing technology in this space?
Absolutely. I mean, I have been, doing this for 20 plus years, and I have done, from cradle to grave compliance stuff using spreadsheets. And, looking at the compliance SaaS technology today, it just blows my mind because, as Michael said, it puts us compliance officers on a happy path. And compliance technology, it helps streamline our overall compliance monitoring efforts. But then, it's the newest trend in enabling business to maintain a strong, compliance programs like your cybersecurity risk, your governance risk program. So, understanding the different ways to use technology is the best way to help find your risk management solutions for your organization, because there are a lot of technology out there that just weaves all of your programs together from an overall, risk management process and solutions for, what's happening with your risk appetite now and in the future. But, compliance technology definitely can mean a variety of services, right? So you help stay up to date with the standards and regulatory requirements where you can track your reg changes as they come through, and what do you do with them? How do you disseminate it? Does it apply to your organization? Can you run a report? So, all of these technology from a compliance officer's perspective is really beneficial from our day-to-day work. And, as one of you just mentioned, throwing bodies at it sometimes is very challenging for us. But, once we put that compliance technology that, helps us to manage our oversight, it just makes our life so much easier. And, we start focusing on being more proactive approach to our compliance management program rather than, doing this manual stuff and getting frustrated by it. So, automation software or hardware that handles process or tasks without compliance needing to help it. You define the action and the task and computer does the rest. So it's the best thing that is happening in our world today.
Perfect. And I'm going to move on to some of the challenges, I guess, that we're looking at in terms of the compliance function. But before we do that, I think, Michael, it's worth probably picking up a little bit on that proactive approach to compliance. And it must be the case that instills more confidence in the board, I guess, and ultimately helps to embed, better decision making, I guess, at board level as a result.
And I think technology is the key to a real change in mindset in the compliance profession. It's to proactive management, not reactive. In other words, Doreen is going to be able, with the use of technology, I hate to put this all on you, Doreen, but you're going to save the world. Doreen is going to be able to identify potential problems earlier than waiting for, a whistleblower complaint to come in, or then having to do an audit and do an internal investigation. Technology is creating, and the demand from compliance officers is, and I know it's kind of hokey, but I want a compliance dashboard. I want to be able to look and use technology to be able to monitor what's going on in my organization, what compliance controls are not being followed, what compliance controls are being followed. And I want to just back up on one point that both Jay and Doreen said, which is absolutely critical. They said it perfectly. You're looking for win-wins with the business. You're creating win-wins. In other words, the business people who want to onboard a third party with a technology are able to do it much faster. Mm-hmm. And they're happy. Jay's story about a person saying, a business person saying, hey, I can find the policy. The other thing is, remember, DOJ has said to everybody, when it comes to policy management, you better have a process by which the business is incorporated into the rollout of any new policy before it occurs, so that we know that the business buys into it. Well, I hate to tell you, A technology like clause match, like policy management, is going to do that. It guarantees that. So that's just an example of how a technology can satisfy all the regulatory requirements and make it more efficient and bring the business on board.
It brings about that ability to demonstrate compliance, not just say that you have been compliant, I guess, which is
exactly
where we're trying to move to. Absolutely. So Jay, maybe looking then at some of the challenges, I guess, that are facing the compliance function, but also then I suppose the opportunities as a result of, trying to address those challenges that we've seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually the challenges are from what we see in compliance functions, at least in large institutions. One of the biggest ones is actually tracking regulations and understanding which regulations have changed and when they change and do they impact the business or not. Because there are 50,000 updates which are applicable to a global bank. And I think a lot of people know that number because there is a Thomson Reuters report coming out every year. But just looking at 50,000 updates a year, it's incredibly difficult to track. And I think the reason is that one, the way regulators publish regulations today is very, very different from each other. Some regulators publish PDF documents, some regulators publish on the website. Very few regulators provide a data feed in a structured form of their regulations. And I haven't seen a single provider in the world which can encompass all of the regulations. So that is a big challenge even today with all the technology which is available to actually collect and combine all of that regulation and then understand technically, from the machine point of view, whether a particular update is applicable to an institution. But there lies an opportunity as well, I think, because we are seeing regulators being very aggressive now on digitization of regulatory rule books and regulatory updates. And it is our vision and view that in the next 10 years, we will have regulations being published in a digital form, structured form, tagged with entities which are tagged within the, even down to paragraph level in the regulation, which will be directly embedded into the organization. So the impact assessment will become almost automatic for those organizations that are prepared for that digital feed of regulations. And obviously this is a longer term, but even today, there is technology which it can already prepare for that and digitize the internal part of compliance, which then can plug into those regulatory feeds.
Yeah, so the sheer volume of regulatory changes is really just overwhelming, and obviously that needs to be managed. So taking that element away from people's time and effort can only be a good thing, I guess. And so, Michael, from your perspective, what are you seeing as the challenges and equally the opportunities in the compliance world?
Well, I think the biggest in the financial sector, we just passed here the Anti-Money Laundering Act, and I think I hate to say this, and I don't mean to be the Chicken Little or doomsayer, but we're coming up on what I would call, an enforcement storm. And this is the reason why. The law itself has passed, obviously raised penalties for BSA, AML violations, all of those things, but they included additional resources. They also included the ability to get at correspondent banks over banking relationships overseas and subpoenas. I think it's all being set up, and FinCEN is about to hire a lot of people, and you can always tell what's going to happen in the government. You can tell when people are assigned and hired, they're going to be productive. Now, that's a challenge, and plus we have the Biden administration, which is going to be very tough in enforcement. what the biggest challenge that I see right now is making sure that our compliance people have the resources, have the authority that they need. I've seen some flatlining on budgets for compliance, which concern me because of this new environment. Technology is a great solution, but we're also going to need more resources in general. So it's a combination of having people and the right technology to face this coming storm. And, the banks have been, they were all settling their cases at the end of the Trump administration because they knew the OCC was going to be a different organization once the Biden administration got in. And that's what's coming. The SEC, OCC, and the Fed are going to be really, really tough going forward.
And that's a really good point. And actually, just numbers that I happen to have at the top of my head, I think in the US last year, there was in and around, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere close to 4 or 5 billion issued in enforcement actions. Globally, it was about 10 billion in
Wow.
AML specific. And then since the financial crash, there's been over 40 billion issued to global financial institutions. So this isn't, we're not talking about small numbers here. And if we're saying that it's going to get even bigger, then this is a really big area to be concerned about.
But Rachel, I was going to also say, look, it's a real challenging time with the pandemic and, coming through the pandemic and, asking for more resources or trying to get technology solutions it's even more important to be efficient and effective in the choices that you make in your resources.
Yeah, really good point. Doreen, from your perspective then, in terms of the challenges facing compliance generally, and then opportunities that you see to improve or create efficiencies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely, agree with Michael and Jay with regards to innovation and utilizing technology. Now, I up until 5 years ago, everything was just, via spreadsheet. But once I started, and curiosity kicked in and I started looking at all these other technology vendors that can help, help my life better as a compliance officer and support my needs. It was, in a lack of a better word, it was game over for me. So I was grinning ear to ear because my daily life was very easy and I was able to pinpoint and ensure, where did the risk lie within the company from a compliance perspective? Where were these policies and procedures? How can I ensure that my organization or an employee is easily able to obtain a policy and procedure? And using these innovative technology tools made it easier for them. The other thing that I definitely agree with Michael is with regards to the regulatory and political change, right? So, in recent years, we've seen a flurry of new regulations. And one of the things that's globally right now, that we can look at is GDPR. So it has extraterritorial reach. It serves as a model for future possible regulations in the critical areas of data privacy and cybersecurity, which in the United States, we're seeing the California Consumer Protection Act. And then of course, the New York DFS program. So as you see these political regulatory shift, we'll start seeing, various different states implementing these to its core. So it's extremely important to have a tool there where somebody like me can ensure and track these 50,000 plus regulations that are being thrown at our way and building awareness and making sure that we implement those changes as we go through, our program and business efficiencies.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to get into some of the technology side. I know we've touched on some of the areas that can help, but Jay, I wanted to pass the mic to you again, just in terms of the technology solutions, the benefits that they're bringing, the opportunities are there, and maybe even some thoughts in terms of how the compliance office function even can evolve to be more, I suppose, embracing of those benefits. First one of the meeting, Jay's on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. There was background noise. Yeah, I guess it's interesting, but one of the compliance COOs put it really great in one of the banks in terms of which type of technology to bring in. And he said, when I look at technology, can I show what I'm implementing to my son, who is a teenager, and can I be proud of what I'm implementing. And I know it's a joke, but of course, he was referring to solutions which were built in 90s and new solutions which are using machine learning, AI, have great experience and great user interface. And that's how, that's the bar for him. But I guess jokes aside is that I think any technology which is helping to streamline that work, which provides either workflow or analytics or a general view of compliance, will make things easier. Will make people happier. And then also, I've seen this happen before in transaction monitoring, is where actually regulators started using transaction monitoring tools to analyze and apply machine learning to transactions, and they started uncovering fraud before the actual banks. So, as long as this doesn't happen and you are staying at the forefront, before the regulators actually start using technology that will start uncovering those deficiencies where a bank can have a surprise from a regulator.
And actually, I love that, that I suppose not an analogy, but that ability to explain or show something to your teenage son and be proud of it and have other people be impressed, I guess, by where we're at today. But the ability also to explain it, I think, is a really big thing for us to consider. And that's where we get more engagement from the regulatory bodies and the supervisors, that ultimately we need to explain these concepts too. Michael, do you think that that's kind of an important piece of this whole puzzle is obviously embedding the technology in the firm, but also then being able to explain that or use that to demonstrate compliance?
Well, definitely. I've been with companies where we have to make a presentation to the prosecutors or the regulators. Here's how our compliance program works. Here's the data. Here's all of this. And trust me, they're pretty sophisticated audience, and you can't pull one over on them. Mm-hmm. They're going to ask you very pressing questions. I think so. That's really important, and it's also the best. The thing that we have to be careful about as technology comes in is that there's so much data that we can generate through our compliance program that we have to be careful about what are we going to use to measure? What's a valid measurement of our program? And don't overwhelm everybody with that. Because otherwise you can get lost in a sea of data these days. The other thing I wanted to make a point about, and I guess, I leave this to Jay and Doreen to answer, because I am frequently asked by clients, I'm a global company, how do I stay abreast of every regulatory development that's occurring all over the world? Is there a solution for that? And I'm, and they're frustrated because Singapore may adopt a new, regulation on a globe that affects a global bank, and they may not be aware of it in the United States when they're managing the compliance program. So I sort of turn, I know I'm not supposed to ask the questions, but I'm looking for a solution that's going to do that. And I know that's a real problem, Jay and Doreen, because my clients are asking me for that all the time. How do we do that? Because they say it drives them crazy.
Yeah, there's definitely a solution to that. I'm glad you asked that question, Michael. And of course, you and I can, and talk about it more offline. But there are RegTech tools, which is regulatory tools out there that helps you not only track, regulations here in the United States, but also in various different parts of the world that you may be interested in. So, and it's not just regulation that applies to mortgage lending, but there are other regulations that, if you're not a mortgage lender, but you serve other global markets, these RegTech tools have the ability to track those regulations as they occur, as they change, as they modify, and embed that into your monitoring and tracking process. So I have a couple that I have used, and I was very impressed with that.
But one thing that I noticed about ClauseMatch, which was pretty, and Jay, maybe I wanted to ask you this, was how you take that information, Doreen, that you're getting, let's say, from an overseas change in your regulations, but then how does that inform your policies? How does that change? What's the impact on your policies? Do I have to go through and, sit there and page through every one of my policies and look for citations? Okay. And that, to me, people are really challenged by that as well. I mean, how do we make sure our policies are staying up to date, and then our controls flowing down from that?
That's part of the inefficiencies too, I guess, is that one is identifying the change, two is actually implementing it. Jay, what are your thoughts on that? That seems to be the sweet spot for Closematch, I guess, that you can manage that more effectively.
Yeah, it's something that we have been doing a lot of work in. I guess I'll address the first point on the regulatory updates. And we have been looking for a solution to integrate the regulatory updates so they could feed into Closematch platform and then inform the policy managers that their policies might be impacted. And it's extremely difficult and almost impossible to find a single provider who would provide all of the required regulations. You can find a provider which tracks all the data privacy. You can find a provider which does, mortgage lending and so on. But to have global regulatory feed, which comes in the same format, is extremely difficult. And what everyone wants is to have every regulation broken down to a citation level, with tags that a machine can interpret and then find the relevant policies, procedures, controls, and tell you about, that potential impact. So we've been doing a lot of work. We were disappointed with just the number of regulatory updates, the amount of regulation, and the fact that it's impossible to even create a parser which will parse all of those regulations across the different regulators. So we took a very long-term view. We are working directly with regulators now to provide that technology to regulators so they can actually use technology as well to write, update, and publish regulations to the world already in a structured format. So you would be able to take a regulation which would be already tagged with taxonomy terms, with ontology, broken down into citations. But this is a 10-year view. There are regulators which are aggressive with that, and they're already starting to do proof of concepts and so on. But ultimately, once that happens, once you have that regulation in a structured form, and on the other side, you have your policies in a structured form and controls, it becomes much easier for the machine to start looking at those links to related content and train the machine that these pieces are related content. And if one changes, you potentially need to change other pieces within the organization. And that is the work we're doing now.
And just one quick point on that. I know we're focused on financial institutions, but my non-financial institution clients are in the same quandary because, for example, they may be doing manufacturing in China, and all of a sudden, what are the environmental regulations when they change there? What are the labor regulations when those change there? And that's the demand right now. And technology is ultimately the solution. I get that, but I don't want us to forget that there are non-financial institutions who are suffering under the same limited, scope. They don't want to have lawyers. God knows we have enough lawyers, right? They don't want to have lawyers all over the place informing them. They want to have, how does it inform our business? And then how do we incorporate it within the business? So
some really good points there. And I do want to make sure that we leave some time for questions as well. We do have a couple in, but if there's any additional questions that you have for the panelists, then please make sure to drop them into the chat now. So, I mean, I guess what we're hearing is that there's no essentially one-stop shop for all of the regulatory requirements. That, you know, there's specialists in different areas, whether that be CLM, which is my area of focus, I guess, from Finerva's perspective, and then you've got other areas that look specifically at mortgage lending, for example. So it is really about identifying I suppose, an ecosystem of services or technology providers, basically, and creating the right environment. So in terms of, you know, and actually, Jay, I love that idea of almost turning it on its head and saying, actually, let's start with the regulators, get them on board with this, and then we can start to have more consumable updates from them. That, you know, that's kind of changing the game a bit. So moving then, I suppose, towards the future of compliance and what that looks like. And of course, I should, you know, add in some of the macroeconomic factors that I know we've touched on a little bit already with, you know, the change in administration in the US. We've got Brexit in the UK. There's all sorts of other changes happening across the globe. So how is that, I suppose, going to impact the compliance function, and what other challenges or I guess, you know, future expectations are we likely to see? Maybe we'll start with Doreen.
Yeah, no. So the good news is that some of these progress are already being made. So some of the trends that I have seen from my perspective, you know, not just at our company, but just across in the compliance space, is the inception of a chief compliance officer role. Now, has there one been in there? Yes, but now the role has been elevated to establish that person as the trusted advisor of the senior management with the seat at the table or in the committee, just, you know, from the top down. Compliance previously was not, you know, we were a cost center, so we're not receiving a substantial amount of resources and headcounts. But now, you know, understanding that compliance is substantial and it's needed in the company, whether you pay for it up front in a positive way or you can pay it in the back. So, you know, receiving that headcount and technology, having technology to help compliance officers is great shift. The other one that I have seen is just, you know, processes evolving around risk management appetite. What does that look like? One of the other thing is establishing that 3 lines of defense. So that model, the awareness of that model has increased, understanding across the board, and appropriate role for compliance within the functions and of course with the institution. The empowerment of compliance and other trends is moving in the right direction. Now, what does that look like? You know, we should not rest our glories just on these you know, imperatives and great things that we're seeing, but future improvements would be repositioning compliance to, you know, build more of a strategic impact from all levels of the institution, clarifying compliance mandates. What does that mean? Existing inconsistencies, tasks, responsibilities, you know, focusing on the bigger risk is identified through your risk management process, your technology, you know, where you're able to evaluate your quantitative metrics and the big data. What does that really look like? And of course, you know, broadening the compliance mandate to not only cover rules, but the culture, the values, the code as well too. And then lastly, resting the impulse for resources intensive solutions while, you know, putting all these processes in place, you're embedding efficiency, effectiveness into a core principle and, you know, leveraging technology, digital tools, and you know, looking at your advanced methodologies.
So no doubt compliance officers will be certainly busy over the next few months and years. So I guess, Jay, from your perspective, in looking at that kind of future picture, what are your thoughts in terms of making sure that it is a more efficient and effective approach?
Well, when I look at technology and just what is possible, I get very excited, as we do a lot of R&D as well, and just what is possible today, even without the data set in compliance in regulatory data sets. In a very short period of time, we have seen some incredible possibilities, like, for example, tagging automatically thousands of pages of regulations with over 90% accuracy. You know, understand over 90% accuracy that the machine can understand that this is an obligation, this applies to this financial services firm, and this applies to that product, you know, down to a paragraph level. And that is coming, and I think people maybe underestimate how quickly technology can change the landscape of what is possible. Another interesting development we've seen is just developments in AI and machine learning, and the machine being able to actually understand the context and create content on the back of that context. There were two models released, one by OpenAI and another one by Google, which completely transformed the natural language processing scene, because now you can actually have a conversation with a machine, and the machine will actually give you a proper answer to that conversation. So we actually took those models and we started applying them on compliance and regulatory data sets. And it's incredible what can be achieved there. This is obviously research and development, but very quickly it will come into production in the next couple of years.
What I will say is that there's a lot of experience on this panel in compliance, and I think I'll hazard a guess at saying that perhaps it's the first time we could describe compliance as exciting, really. And certainly the future of compliance is exciting. And Michael, what are your thoughts in terms of where we're going?
Exciting compliance, that's a great idea. That's almost an oxymoron, as they say, right? But no, I want to say that building on Doreen's point about the empowerment of CCOs is absolutely true. That's probably, I tell people it's the hottest profession there is right now. More and more people are going into it. And I think technology ultimately, thanks to Jay's help, is going to make CCOs and compliance in general more efficient and better able to prioritize risks and in allocating resources and better at their jobs. Now, the other trend that I think Doreen mentioned that I think is really important is we're seeing that compliance really needs a seat at the table on overall risk management for the business. If there's anything that happened during the pandemic, it was to see how disruption can just shake a business to its core. And compliance in the end is good. They're good people in terms of understanding risk and managing risk. And I think they're going to play a bigger and bigger role in enterprise risk management, not just in the legal and compliance component of that. I think that skill is going to occur. But my biggest trend to watch for is the demands by society, by workers, by employees for ethics and effective compliance and good conduct and promoting the mission of the company. And I think that, employees are happier, and this generation, being young people, I'm at the old end here, but at the young people are demanding is we want to contribute something to society. We want to do something that's good. Our mission of our company is to do good. And we can already see it with the ESG movement and the demands and activism that's encouraged. And compliance, I think, is going to be a fundamental player at that table when it comes to good governance. And that's why I'm just as excited, even though I'm not as smart as Jay, but I'm just as excited about technology and the ability to making compliance more effective. I've been a proponent for compliance for 20 years, and I'm seeing great things that are coming, but we're going to have huge demands placed on us. And that's what I'm hoping that we can marshal the forces to really transform again over the next 5 years.
Yeah, just to add to Michael's point, even if the technology provider that you may have or are interested, I have found that is very important to me and beneficial as a compliance officer is work with the technology provider, whether or not they're your vendor or not your vendor. And, they have these resources, these bandwidths that they're building, to help people in the financial institution and the firm, people like us, your attorneys, your risk managers, your compliance people. And, I have been working with various different technologies as an advisor where, me as a compliance officer, what do I want to see being built into these systems? What is going to help me, get my life better? So, I highly encourage, for those of you that are listening and are interested in your technology and the providers that you have, or, with ClauseMatch as well, is work with them, what you would like to see, what works, what is, what's a better workflow, what will make your life easier. So I'm a very huge, advocate for that.
Absolutely. So we have another question that I want to pick up before we get to closing comments. So what are we, I suppose, if we're trying to put forward a business case in terms of RegTech adoption, rather than this current approach or previous approach of throwing headcount at the problem, how do we achieve that, I guess, in terms of making that case, that instead of, I think Michael picked up on it earlier, that we, don't give me more people, I need better resources as well as people. So how do we make that case from a business case perspective?
I'll take that one because
sure.
I
you've lived it, Doreen. You've lived it. So
that's right. So, I mean, from a business case perspective, you as a compliance officer, look at what your functions are today. Look at, what those functionals entail. Is it extremely manual? How much time is it taking? What your responsibilities are? And, are you really, majority of your time, are you being reactive, fighting fires? Or, are you definitely want to get towards being that proactive state, right? So, one of the things that I want to mention as an example is just looking at these regulations that was coming across my desk. And, I was tracking these regulations via subscription to an entity where I was getting all these emails and identifying, putting these regulations into a spreadsheet, and then going through the spreadsheet and looking at these regulations, as high level. Okay, is this something that is applicable to, my line of work, or is it not applicable? And, the technology tool that I'm using today, does the work for me. I go in and I identify these are the areas that I'm interested in. It's built on AI and machine learning. And, when those regulations are updated, they come to me in a summarized form, automatically into my tool. And, it cuts down pretty much 80% of my time, which opened me up to be able to, focus on other things. So really look at that, internal process, how much time it's taking, how many people it's taking, and then, look at various different technology that can definitely automate this process for you.
Absolutely. And I'll add a tiny one to that. Even in my own kind of past experience, very much focusing on manual laborious tasks rather than actually looking at the money laundering risks that the companies that I've worked for were facing. So it's about identifying the uses of technology and how they can actually make the experts' jobs kind of more efficient and effective, so that they are actually focusing on the areas they should be focusing on, instead of, and I hate the term, but instead of ticking the compliance box, let's kind of use the technology to empower the compliance function.
But Rachel, I was going to say that, you make a great point about that, because, in a sense, both you and Doreen are talking about what's the return on our investment. If we spend this one, $10,000, look at the person hours that we're going to save, in terms of, my goal is 5 years from now, we all got to get together and talk about the end of spreadsheets. The end of an Excel spreadsheet, or because how many times I went into a Fortune 100 company on a vendor onboarding process, and this is like one of the biggest companies in the world. And you know how they showed me their vendors? Here's our spreadsheet.
Yeah.
This to me is just a cry out for technology.
Absolutely. And we've got about a minute left. So just before I do make the final comments, I've noticed, Jay, and I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot a bit, but when both Doreen and Michael mentioned the word spreadsheet or Excel, I could see you almost wince. So maybe we'll give you the last thoughts in this.
No, I think in terms of spreadsheets, I just thought about the fact that the problem of spreadsheets has become so huge. There are companies which are going into the organization to discover those spreadsheets and to find discrepancies, or what is the actual spreadsheet that is driving the risk management, or is driving the decision making. So I just thought, Michael is saying that at some point we'll see the death of spreadsheets, at least in compliance. I think this is definitely moving into that direction. But on another point as well, actually, we have been embracing spreadsheets, which have been created by compliance officers, because this is the only available data set of how regulations map to controls to policies and procedures, in organizations. And we take that data set and we actually turn it into something that a machine can learn from. So we have been grateful for those spreadsheets. Yeah, I think looking at just if we go back to the business case as well, it's the efficiency, it's the reduced risk, but also there are a lot of technology solutions which help drive business. If you can onboard a client in 60 seconds, that's a massive, like 100 times improvement. If you can respond to regulatory inquiries quicker, that's a massive improvement. But also, for example, a friend who runs Revolut, he was saying, if I can reduce my transaction cost by 75%, and I'm making millions of transactions a day, that is a massive business driver, and that is driven by compliance. If I can do a better way to investigate fraud, do transaction monitoring, and my actual transaction cost is going down, this is a huge business benefit. So yeah, there are benefits that you can bring to front office, actually from the compliance point of view, that will help to create that business case.
Yeah, and I think this is really a conversation that we could continue probably for another couple of hours, quite frankly. But unfortunately, we are just a little bit over time. A huge thank you to the panelists today for sharing their insight, their knowledge, their experience. No doubt it's been hugely beneficial to all of the attendees today. And also a massive thanks to Numa for hosting the event. And I have been asked to let everybody know that the recording will be made available via email from today's panel discussion. So again, thank you so much to everybody who's dialed in and everybody who's participated, and of course to Jay, to Michael, and to Doreen for all of their expertise on the call. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.